our topic is CTV the savior of legacy media companies, and what does that mean? So I hope we have a really interesting conversation. We have two great guests to help us talk. I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Sure.
So first, Joanna.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, I'm on. Good. I'm Joanna O'Connell. I'm a VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Been in the digital advertising world for 20 plus years at this point. Think a lot about the advertising industry broadly. Think a lot about the future of advertising. A lot about the consumer experience in advertising. That's me. That's me.
And I'm Stephen Byrne. I'm the Exec Director of New Partnerships at SmartClip. I'm based in Stockholm, but you can probably hear from my accent that I'm from the UK. So maybe I can provide a bit of European flavor for this panel discussion. We can talk about the media owner landscape over on this side of the pond. But yeah, my role involves working with media owners, content creators, broadcasters, publishers. So I meet with them on a weekly basis and a daily basis and talk about their goals when it comes to CTV and video advertising. So be interested to see where the discussion takes us.
Well, good. So as we start to think about the evolution of the marketplace, and CTV being kind of the biggest evolution piece that's going on right now, what that's taking over is from the linear TV side of the business. And the linear side of the business is declining. It's also getting much older. And so I have a lot of questions about what can CTV do to help save or not save the linear TV, the traditional legacy businesses, and can they convert their revenue from linear TV to CTV? And equally important to that is, can they be good stewards of a new environment and not corrupt that new environment, in my bias, the way they've potentially corrupted the linear TV environment by overloading it with ad loads.
Interesting. Okay. That wasn't one question, was it? That
was
all the questions, right?
Go for it.
That was all the questions. Well, one of the things that we had sort of talked about when we were prepping for this conversation was why marketers stick with linear TV, and maybe we'll sort of start there, right? There's the obvious stuff, like, of course, sight, sound, motion advertising is incredibly powerful. It's emotive. It creates connection. It changes minds. It moves people. So that goes without saying. I think part of the challenge for brands, in total fairness to them, is that they have very, very complex models that are predicated upon a certain set of inputs and that work a certain way based on a certain kind of data. And the practical reality is they know that by doing X, they're going to sell Y bits of toilet paper off the shelf.
Is that true today, when they used to get X times 20 impressions from what they did, and today they're getting X times 5?
I think they're trying to, on a certain level, I think they're trying to chase what they know, because what they know gets them the business results that they need as an engine of growth inside of an organization. And there is a huge, huge history that sits underneath that, a lot of learnings, right? So I'm not going to call it entrenchment, although it is. I'm also going to give them some credit, which is to say they're used to their business is working a certain way based on a certain set of inputs. The hard part is that the world is changing really, really, really quickly, right? Consumer behavior, obviously, pandemic was a big accelerator of changing consumer behavior. It's still sight, sound, motion advertising, right? But the CTV landscape is messy. It's messy and fragmented, and there are challenges with measurement. There are challenges with interoperability, all things we can talk about. So clearly brands need to be there. They know they need to be there. And I think we're maybe graduating past I checked the box that said I ran the test, into the no, this is real, I have to do this. But there are very, I think, material challenges that making wholesale switches difficult. I don't know what you see, but
yeah, totally. I mean, I think let's just sing the praises of TV for a moment, sure, if we may, because at the end of the day, it's still the best place to achieve cost-effective reach, to get a brand message out there. Even today, even if, to your point, there is an older demographic of people who are watching TV now.
Well, but define TV today. Like what?
Well, I guess I'm using the linear TV definition, the daytime, the TV, the broadcast TV multicast signal, as opposed to the watching the same TV network on the streaming platform. But it's very messy, as you said. I think that's definitely the best place to reach your audience, and I think when it comes to building brands, as opposed to sort of direct response or shifting units, like you said, if you just want to talk about building a brand and telling a story, television is probably still the best place to do that over a period of years and maybe decades, right? But if you zoom in on just the last 3 years, where we talk about the CTV growth, I mean, it's insane. It's gone from I think like 10% of the TV ad spend in the US, and now I read a stat that by 2025, CTV will be half as much as TV ad spend in the US. So it just shows how quickly it's caught up, and it's taken ad dollars and how much it's shifting across. I don't think we'll see that much in Europe to the same extent, but
why the difference that it won't grow as quickly in Europe?
Because Europe is much more fragmented. Europe is obviously a set of many countries, some of which are really small, 5 million people, not as big as the metropolitan area of New York. And they have their own national ecosystems with 2 or 3 broadcasters that really dominate that landscape. So really, when it comes to CTV viewing, if you look at any of the European studies that come out, you'll see that the broadcast of the BVOD services are the ones that really dominate when it comes to CTV consumption. And actually these there's challenger brands that are coming through, and also the gaffers who are starting to show up. They definitely do not consume anywhere near as much of the attention as a kind of typical broadcaster would do. So it's really interesting if you're an advertiser and you're thinking, where do I plan where do I get my campaign on CTV? It's actually through the broadcasters in the main, who are the linear TV guys. So they are offering now more advanced options and more CTV options to try and kind of capture this ad spend.
But you don't. So you have country level fragmentation, which is absolutely fair. That feels true. But I get the sense that there's less explicit competition and desire to stick it to the other guy in Europe than there is in the United States, because I do feel like we have some real behemoths in the kind of content space and programming space here in the States, and there's progress, but in general I think there are real fiefdoms, and so there's, I think, a little less interest to sort of genuinely play together than maybe is given lip service to, and it feels a little bit like a US problem.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, the market's so big there, right? So they can do it on their own.
Exactly.
And I think in Europe you can't. So you have to form alliances. You have to team up with your previous enemies and become frenemies for a period to try and fight off the other guys, right? It's kind of like Game of Thrones and the White Walkers, right? And
wait, who are the White Walkers?
Yeah, they're the big enemy, right? And so everybody has to team up, and the 5 armies have to come together and fight the other guy. So I think that's how I'd characterize the European market from a CTV perspective. It's everybody's talking about it on the demand side, but it's not really cutting through to the extent that it is in the US market.
When you think about some of these big behemoths, right? I'll call out Google and YouTube as being one of the very big behemoths, and I'm interested to hear what you say, because it was just announced, I believe, last week, that YouTube now can't be the sole, Google can't be the sole seller of YouTube in Europe, that they have to diversify. And how is that going to impact what's going on?
Okay, but hang on. They are playing a different game. They are. I mean, they are playing a direct response. They're playing a direct response game. I don't care what anyone says. I don't think the people at Google understand brand. I really don't. And I think that they're sort of trying to pay lip service to it, but I don't think that that's where they go to capture dollars. And so, what is the purpose of television advertising is probably part of the conversation that we need to have. I don't think they have to be the enemy so much as how do we figure out a way for them to be less important than they are, even if they're just a part of the mix. Like I don't, you know what I mean? Like I don't think of NBC Universal and Google in the same conversation.
Okay, so I do.
Okay, let's bring it on.
I think that what all of them are competing for is our attention, right? And they're competing for our attention with great content. And to people who watch YouTube on a consistent basis, that's great content to them. Mr. Beast has 100 million followers, and he puts out and drops a new piece of content, and it's all my 12-year-old can talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a fair point, but I don't know that those companies understand, what a big marketer is really trying to do in the way that some of these other more traditional companies do. So they're incredibly innovative and they're incredibly important in some ways. I'm not arguing that they're not, they absolutely are. But so on a certain level, I suppose you could argue it's the other guy's game to lose.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Rather than it is a game that they obviously win.
Yeah, but they have so many different angles in the fight for the living room, right? And they've got the hardware approach with the operating systems, and they've got the content approach with YouTube, and it's not bashing Google, right? They're actually having a meeting around the corner here, so we should be a bit careful what we say.
For now.
But they are, I think it's just they have such an advantage, right? And I think it's incumbent upon the broadcasters and the other media owners to put it to get together and to form alliances and to try and find ways in which they can, as you say, differentiate the market. And I think you're right. TV broadcasters have been selling media and building brands for 30, 40, 50 years. They are experts at it.
Yeah.
And they should continue to do that, but do it together.
Yes, I think that's sort of the point. Like, it's their game to lose rather than it is naturally Google's game to win. And by the way, companies like Google, not companies like Google, they're under a lot of threat and pressure that is almost more existential. So I think it's sort of easy for us to be worried about them, but we also have to appreciate that they are walking an extremely fine line right now, and that's real.
And to the point, they decided to open up their inventory to other people in Europe as opposed to pay the fine.
There's no way they would have just been like, no problem, that's awesome.
No, they were forced into it, and I just think it's an interesting thing to think how that will impact the marketplace going forward.
Totally.
As we think about the big guys who are getting into CTV, and they're getting into it both from a subscription basis and from an ad-supported basis.
Yeah.
And I guess I wonder what you think of how those two are going to materialize over time and what the different business models, how they'll progress.
I think, if I just start by saying, I think obviously SVOD has been where viewership has been built over the last 5 years, especially accelerated during the pandemic. All of the big budget drama, all of the sport that's moving towards streaming, that is the domain of SVOD. But I think now we're seeing, obviously, it's a totally different macroeconomic situation right now coming, and already here for many people. Cost of living is getting squeezed. Inflation is here. People are not going to be continuing to fork out $15, $20 a month for this subscription, that subscription. So there's going to have to be some kind of consolidation in terms of services used. So I think what we're seeing a little bit now is some of the savvy ones are getting ahead of the game and thinking, okay, how do I turn this into a hybrid experience? And I think that's really where the future is going to be, because I think nobody's going to have 15, 20, 30 apps on their CTV that they're sort of split across all the time, going from advertising on the one hand to subscription on the other. I think it's going to be much more
until Google
seamless.
owns the own OS, right? And they can help, with the algorithm across all the different platforms.
Yeah, but Apple are doing the same, and Amazon. So I think it's really I think hybrid is where we're going to see a lot of that convergence happening.
Yeah, it was never the case that you were going to have SVOD just continue to multiply and multiply and multiply. You're right. We're in a particular moment in history where the pressures are even more kind of dramatic. But it was never going to be the case that the average. It's sort of very, we have a lot of hubris and myopia. It was easy for us to think, oh well, there'll be 50. What are we going to do? There are going to be 25 of them. No, that's not something that the average consumer would be able to support anyway. So it is an interesting question of how that plays. So the hybrid thing is interesting. I wonder a little bit, are there also going to be some entrants in the market that say, actually, maybe I partner, or maybe I go over here, right? Like that it's just maybe not supportable?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer yet, but that's just something that I'm thinking about.
As the big media companies get into both SVOD and AVOD, and the macroeconomic situation is maybe pushing AVOD quicker because it's a less costly alternative. Do you feel like the big media companies are going to honor the consumer experience?
But I think that's where the hybrid model is quite neat, because it's both from a consumer experience perspective. It allows you to not overdose on ads, because you can have a step subscription where you have a $5 or $10 where you get a couple of ads, but you don't get 15 ads which are basically the same ad, which which drives everyone crazy. So I think that's where there's a sort of an opportunity there to try and finesse and find the model. I mean, if you look at how Hulu have obviously done this in the US for a long time. I mean, you guys can speak to how successful that is or not. But I think it's still relatively new in the European market. But we're definitely seeing that broadcasters here have traditionally had maybe a different brand for their AVOD business and to their SVOD business. And now they're starting to get rid of one of the brands and merge them under one like ITVX or in the Nordics, Viaplay Group is now the SVOD platform, and they've partnered with Pluto TV for the AVOD. So the previous Via Free brand is now dead. So I think you're starting to see these things change where there is consolidation.
It feels as though for the more traditional media companies, sort of really outside of the box thinking and innovation is sort of an unnatural muscle for them to flex. I mean, you gave Hulu as an example. That's a good example. That's not Disney, And so, Roku, they're doing lots of really interesting things and innovating in all kinds of ways and doing lots of sort of live testing of new formats and so on and so forth. So there's the not terrible ad experience, which is like kind of a sad baseline for us to be aiming for. And then there's like, what is a great, set of ad experiences of the future in these environments where we have so much, like it's such an open palette right now. But they're going to throw the money. They're going to go where the money is, right? So if in the short term that means they just shove more ads in, I don't have a ton of faith that they're not going to just do that.
Right.
To actually answer your question.
Yeah, I don't have a ton of faith either, and so I guess I hope that they make enough revenue from the AVOD and the SVOD side that they don't have to make up all of the revenue from, from ad corruption.
I've been asking them about that for years now. Like, what kinds of things are you doing to kind of manage the consumer experience? And they're, we're sort of, I want to believe that the answers are getting better.
But in general, ad loads here in Europe are not as high as in the US. So I think, yes, it's a problem, and people do comment that, that BVOD service, there's 8 mid-rolls, oh my God. But, I mean, if you compare it to watching 45 minutes of linear TV, it's actually nowhere near the same number of exposures. So I think it's the levels are slightly different, and I think that's also why there's probably less inventory overall in Europe, and why it is such a smaller market. It's not really at the scale that it is in the US, but that will of course grow in the coming years as we see CTV come to the fore in the European markets. Yeah.
So we started the conversation that you correctly brought us back to about why are CMOs still spending so much of their money in linear TV and not investing as much in the newer platforms? And part of that, I think, is price related, right? That they have a benchmark for linear TV that all their models are based on and where they've seen success. And to have to go 2x to that cost is a big point in it. So I wonder how you think CEOs are going to think about testing these higher price points and being willing to play out what those higher price points mean.
Well, of course, all of these things are interconnected, so you can't have a conversation about the price point without having a conversation about the measurement, right? And then you get into a really long, complicated discussion about what is a currency and what is measurement in the world of television, where in digital we're like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? There's like a bunch of ways you can buy, and then you measure it and you see if it worked. And it's challenging, I think, for digital people to sort of wrap their heads around the fact that there's this weird currency versus measurement conversation that happens. But there's so much entrenchment in that, It does feel like there's a lot more experimentation with sort of alternative, I was going to say alternative truths, but that's ridiculous. Like with, other lenses on what's happening. And I think like just naturally, the fits and starts of those kinds of experiments as they start to play out, people will be more willing to take chances and be more willing to move because they will say, oh, I have a sense of what this is doing for me. But we're in a weird experiment, we're like in the awkward teenage phase of it.
What if you come at it from the other angle with what Netflix is talking about doing, about commercializing, their content? And I wonder how consumers are going to feel about commercialization in a Netflix model.
I don't think it's going to go well. I really feel like the traditional SVOD platforms they've built their whole brands up on this high-end drama, this non-interrupted viewing, and that's what people go to these platforms for. That's what they pay so much money for. It's to be undisturbed and to be completely zoned in on your favorite show. I know Netflix is trying to kind of change its perspective to be a bit more like TV with its sort of zeitgeisty shows and things that they're doing now, but they're not really capturing the national zeitgeist in Europe. But with that, by any means, I mean that's the role of the broadcaster, right? So I think I think that's where people will start to switch off actually, and I think you have to be really, really careful how you introduce advertising into that sort of type of content. I think it works much better around big formats, around the classic kind of soap opera content that is big in Europe, of course, as well, and those are still the more streamed shows. If you look at the latest research done by Thinkbox in the UK, and they looked at the top 20 shows of 2021, the number one show was Coronation Street from ITV, this like long-standing soap opera that's been running for 40 years, 50 years, and I think the biggest show from Netflix was Friends, and then the next biggest show was Big Bang Theory. Two shows that were built on broadcast television, ironically, but are now being kind of rewatched and streamed again on
that
on
Netflix won't have much longer, right?
Yeah.
Because they'll be pulled back to.
Well,
Right.
what I was thinking, does it force Netflix to up its? But first of all, like we all know they had no choice, right? Like that it was not sustainable for them to continue on the path that they were on. So, does it force them to up their game? I mean, it's gonna force them to up their game. It has to, right? If people aren't gonna stick around.
Yeah.
Because the content is not compelling enough,
Yeah.
then they need to come up with more compelling content.
Yeah. But I think they could offer different access to different types of content, right? You don't have to have the
Sure.
the Netflix originals in the free service, right?
Yeah,
That would make
it
sense.
could be tiered. I'm really into this idea of giving consumers both more choice and more responsibility.
Yeah.
So Hulu used to, I don't even know if they have it anymore, but they used to have an ad that said, do you want to watch 1/62 at the beginning, or do you want to watch commercials throughout? And that's a fairly straightforward way of making a consumer become part of the conversation and take some responsibility for the choice and like live with their choice. There's something basic and psychological in sort of human psychology in that. But they also had the do you like this, do you don't like this? And they never paid it off effectively because I think they just didn't have enough good advertising to do it. But continuing to, I think, play around with different models the tiering, for example, giving consumers more responsibility to make choices, is
They understand the value
again, like from a
exchange.
basic human psychology standpoint, has some power.
Yeah.
So to that end, because the AVODs and the SVODs have so much rich data about their audience, do you think contextual advertising will play better in there and accelerate quicker in those environments they will than in data-driven linear for the short term?
I think, if you've got so much information from a user based on their subscription data, right? I mean, that is a treasure trove of first-party data that you can really use, and advertisers are looking for that. They're looking for an alternative to this third-party cookie that we all know is leaving us any month now. So there is no kind of better proxy than the first-party data that is then existing. The question is, how do you get that data out to the market at scale? And again, I think the way to do that, you have to be able to do it. Either you have the scale in the platform yourself, and you're in a big enough market, like maybe the UK or France or Germany. But when you're in the smaller European markets, I think you need to have partners that help you get that first-party data to the market at scale, because one broadcaster is not going to get you there. One SVOD provider is not going to get you there. And I think but that can be very powerful. In Sweden, we just launched a premium video alliance, which is 3 broadcasters selling together on the platform, and they're going to market with a very simple context and content-based sales model. They haven't even layered in their first-party data yet, but that's the next step. But as soon as they do that, then we can target, all male, all female, or all age groups, and make it much more like TV. But the market is happy enough with just having this through one deal idea and a programmatic video buy. So I think we're quite far behind in many respects in terms of how we see CTV evolving, and I think it'll be interesting to see how it looks in 22.
It also gives you an opportunity to learn from the mistakes of the United States, and there are
plenty.
Too many to mention. But if you think about it, I think one of the mistakes is that we, in digital, way overcorrected for audience, way overcorrected, became obsessed with the notion of audience, and forgot about the fact that there's an enormous amount of value in the relevance that comes from context, of course, but also the value of the halo effect of the content itself, right, on the brand, on adjacency. And TV people know that. TV knows that. TV understands that. So in some ways, I worry that TV is making the same mistake as digital and is going to overcorrect for audience. That makes me nervous that it's going to become, it's all about outcomes, it's all about precision targeting, it's all about audience. And by the way, that's something I've lived for 20 years, so I know that sounds a little bit ironic coming from me, but I also see all the mistakes that we made.
Okay, so I'm going to end with one final question, and this kind of plays at the heart, I think, of what consumers want to watch and what they want to spend their time on. And so my question is, because I'm doing some personal research on this, what is premium content, a definition of premium content to you?
I think there's 3 components that I can think of. So there's the quality of the talent on the acting, the person on the screen. Then there's the production values, and then there's the distribution. And I think if you've got all of those 3, and if you're looking at the latest Netflix House of Cards example from back in the day with Kevin Spacey, maybe not a good example now, and so the star quality of Kevin Spacey with excellent production values, best in the business, frankly, high budget, and the distribution of Netflix at the time, that was a hit. When it comes to premium TV, you would never get anything like that on YouTube or anything near that, right? But you could say, from a YouTube example, there is extremely experienced content creators who grew up on YouTube, who are the big stars on YouTube, PewDiePie and back in the day, or your example before. I mean, that is the top talent for YouTube, right? So the same applies there. They have good content and they have a platform for distribution. I would argue that they are just not at the same level as a Netflix.
Premium is in the eye of the beholder. For real. If it's premium to your 12-year-old and therefore the brand advertising next to it is more meaningful and resonant with your 12-year-old, then one could argue that that's premium, especially if that brand's willing to pay more, because someday that 12-year-old's going to be able to buy that product. That's a weird example, but you know what I'm saying. So that's the problem. You gave a very good answer, and it's true, and I feel like I want that to be actually true, because I believe I believe truly in my heart in kind of high quality content creation. But I also have to kind of be like, I'm 46, and I don't really understand the world of 12-year-olds and how they think about the world of content and what is meaningful to them and high value to them. That's where I feel a little bit like I can't speak to that. It feels like it's in the eye of the person consuming it on a certain level.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about advertising context, though, your 12-year-old is not the niche target that necessarily a brand wants to reach. So I think
that's why it's a weird example.
Yeah.
But take the average 27-year-old who is obsessed with a particular influencer on YouTube, and is the brand adjacency for that 27-year-old more resonant than the brand adjacency on Friends? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the hard part.
Exactly. But I think at that point they have their own little ecosystem, their own little worlds, right? So within YouTube there is a hierarchy of talent and quality, and within Netflix there's another, within broadcast TV there's another, and it's interesting to see how those will start to kind of cross-pollinate as they mature.
Well, I think what we've realized is it's complicated. It's very, very
What else is
complicated.
new?
And so I thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was